Hi guys. Today we're going to take a look at another quadratic equation, and instead of trying to solve it using all three methods, because not all three methods are going to be applicable in this case, we're going to try to figure out which method would actually work best based on our own individual strengths and or weaknesses. So the one we're going to take a look at is question 23 from the Solving Equations Multiple Methods practice. All right, question number 23. So number 23 says x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. So the three methods that we have in our arsenal are factoring, completing the square, and quadratic formula. All right. Now, in this case, let's try factoring and just see if it works. Can you guys tell me two numbers that multiply to give me 1 but add to give me positive 4? Uh-oh. Turns out they don't exist, right? Because the only numbers that multiply to give me 1 are 1 and 1. And I can promise you this, 1 and 1 do not add to give me 4. So factoring is off, the table, so to speak. So let's take a look at the two methods that are left, completing the square and quadratic formula. Completing the square may actually be pretty good. And the reason it may be pretty good is this number right here, the b value is even. So maybe let's actually try completing the square and see if we can do it. So first, I gotta make sure I get my constant to the right-hand side. Okay. How did I do that? I subtracted 1 from both sides. Now, we have to make sure we remember, based on what we did in geometry this year, the formula for completing the square is b over 2 squared. So I'm going to take my 4 and plug it in here. So 4 over 2 squared. 4 over 2 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm actually going to add 4 to both sides. Okay? Now over here, this is pretty easy. Negative 1 plus 4 is 3. What times 1 gives me 4, but adds to give me 4? Oh my gosh, it's just 2 and 2. So x plus 2 squared. Now, I have to get rid of a square. And how do I do that? Well, I take the square root of both sides. So I'm now going to say x plus 2 equals plus minus, well, 3 doesn't really have a regular old square root, so I'm just going to leave it as rad 3. And then, last but not least, to get rid of a plus 2, I'm gonna minus 2. So my final answer, believe it or not, is negative 2 plus or minus rad 3. Oh my god, so whack, right? But believe it or not, that actually happens quite a bit with quadratics. Now let's say, oh my god, like I just hate completing the square. I just can't be bothered. And I happen to have memorized quadratic formula. We know quadratic formula will always work, right? So let's actually see if we can do it right. So the quadratic formula method, I'm just going to draw a little squiggle here to kind of keep the work separate, would involve negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let's start plugging in. Negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times 1 times 1, okay, all over 2 times 1. All right, so 16 minus 4 is rad 12, all over 2. Okay, so at first glance, guys, this may not look like this. And the reason it doesn't look like that is because we actually have to simplify a radical. Oh my god, can you imagine? Let's simplify rad 12. To simplify rad 12, well, I'm going to have to split rad 12 up into rad 4 and rad 3. I chose rad 4 and rad 3 because rad 4 happens to be a perfect square, and so that's just going to give me 2 rad 3. So, negative 4 plus 2 rad 3 all over 2. So, to finish it off, negative 4 over 2 is negative 2. And 2 rad 3 over 2, well, it's 2 over 2, it's 1. So I'm just left with rad 3. Okay, so let's draw some lessons here, okay? This example showed us the weakness of factoring, because no matter how hard we tried, this problem was simply not factorable. It also showed us that the quadratic formula, even though it always works, also has a little bit of a weakness. And that weakness is that oftentimes, guys, we're going to end up having to simplify a radical before we can get our final answer. You normally won't run into that problem when you're doing plain old completing the square, all right? So moral of the story is, try factoring if it works. If it doesn't work, take a look at completing the square. If it's an even number for your b value, chances are completing the square is probably a really, really good method, all right? If it's not an even number, then you're probably stuck with quadratic formula.